But anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Siegel. I'm a recent Democratic nominee for Congress here in Texas, and also your moderator this evening. And it's been about 5 weeks since Election Day. And in Texas, of course, this was a time of highs and unfortunately a few lows as well. We defeated Donald Trump. We elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We won some very important local races. But in terms of the Texas House and the United States Congress, we did not do very well. And if you've been following, there's been a lively debate about what happened. How do we analyze this? Is it the moderates' fault? Is it the progressives' fault? You know, whose fault is it? Is if you watch on Twitter, that's what a lot of the conversation is. And big picture, there was a high expectations. We had a lot of money come into the state for the state house candidates, for the congressional candidates. There was excitement. There were polls that showed us ahead or tied. And so even though the Biden-Harris campaign was not active here, a lot of people were. A lot of money was active here. And we all had really high aspirations and really put a ton of effort and really our lives into this effort. And so, with all these expectations, why didn't we win? That's the huge question. I don't know if it's a $100 million question. I mean, if we can solve this question, it's great things for the future of Texas. And so some of the topics have been about messaging. Was it about the racial justice messaging, about defunding the police? Was it about, we didn't talk enough about direct economic aid for the people? Was it about tactics? Was it because we stopped door knocking during COVID-19? Was it about how we spent the money? Did we spend too much on consultants and TV ads? Did we talk to the wrong voters? For so long in Texas, we believe that if everybody votes, Democrats win. It turns out when everyone votes, we don't necessarily win, right? A lot of Republicans voted. And so, with less than an hour to go tonight, 6 of us, we're not trying to solve all these problems, but we're hoping to contribute to this conversation and plant some seeds for the days ahead. And we know that if we win Texas, we win the world. We're not there yet, but tonight you're gonna hear from 6 people who have given a ton of their lives to making lasting progressive change in Texas. And so we're gonna start out with some self-introductions. And so really honored to be joined by all these panelists. First up, I'm going to ask Cristina Tzuntzun Ramirez, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in 2020, to introduce yourself. Welcome, Cristina.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually coming to this Zoom meeting virtually from McAllen, Texas. I ran for U.S. Senate and got to travel across the state. And as someone that has spent a lot of time registering and mobilizing voters, especially young voters and Latino voters, I think what's critical that we learn especially is to not overestimate where we're at, but also not underestimate where we can grow from here. So I'm here in the Valley to talk to leaders about what we need to do different and invest and listen and learn. But what I also want to remind folks and why I wanted to be part of this conversation is that Republicans took power in Texas over 20, 30 years. And we are at a tipping point in Texas. And what's great about this conversation, it's a multiracial conversation of leaders, not just about how we flip Texas from red to blue, but about how we create transformative change. And I'm excited to share the lessons learned on the Senate race, both good, bad, the ugly and the beautiful, so that we can continue to build this movement with these folks here and y'all that are part of this movement as well.
Right on, thanks so much. Next up, we have Julie Oliver, Democratic nominee for Congress in the Texas 25th. Hey, Julie, what's going on?
Hi, y'all. Well, I'm a 2-time candidate, lost both times, but you know what? When you think about what we have done in Texas, and I'm really proud to be on this panel because I feel like we really ran with some exceptional candidates. That has not necessarily been the history over the last 30 years when Republicans took over state, local, and federal politics in Texas. And you have to remember, Republicans have been investing in this for nearly 40 years, but we started to see gains about 30 years ago. So if you think about it, we've really only been at this for 2 to 3 election cycles. And we moved the needle a lot in those 2 to 3 election cycles. So there's still a lot more work to do. And I'm happy to dive in later, but really, really proud and grateful to be on this panel tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So Aklah Bacy, Democratic nominee for the Texas House, District 138 in Harris County. Welcome, Akilah.
Thank you, Mike. It's so good to see you guys again. I hope that everybody has gotten some rest for these last few weeks. But yes, my name is Aklah Bacy, and I was your Democratic nominee for Texas House District 138. It was truly an honor of a lifetime. It was an exciting race, and I agree with what Julie just said. Is that, looking back, it's easy to see, what we didn't do, but we have to look and see what we did do, and build on that going forward. One of the things that I've been saying is that I know a lot of times we look at these races and it feels very hopeless, but don't lose your hope because we've been fighting and we are inching closer and closer towards the Texas and the United States that we know we deserve and that we can create. So I'm excited to be here to talk and to brainstorm with so many amazing leaders who had the privilege to run next to in 2020. So
Right on. Thank you so much. Clayton Tucker, Democratic nominee for Texas Senate District 24, a largely rural district that crosses 17 counties, including a small piece of Travis. Welcome, Clayton.
Howdy, y'all. So, as Mike said, I'm Clayton Tucker. I'm joining y'all from Lampasas, Texas, where we have probably about 6,000 people and 10,000 deer. And I'm a beekeeper and rancher out here. Currently been working with Commissioner Jim Hightower. He's one of the last Democrats to win statewide. He was the agriculture commissioner. And I'm also the statewide director for Our Revolution, Texas. And we're here to stay in good trouble, as we Texans do.
Thank you, Clayton. And Lorenzo Sanchez, Democratic nominee for Texas House District 67 up in Collin County. How you doing, Lorenzo?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who's tuning in. I was a first-time candidate in 2022. I got through a really competitive primary and runoff with a corporate oil and natural gas attorney, and we're really proud of what we were able to build here in Collin County and trying to make sure that we keep this movement going. We know that we are on the verge of, flipping Texas towards a better way, and we just want to make sure that we continue to inspire people to stand up and put in those hours to get really, really good people who are focused on getting elected. The reason why I chose to run in my community was because I was raised here and I love it. I want to make sure that we are fighting for every single person. And I've been given the absolute pleasure of being able to meet so many wonderful people and so many candidates throughout the state. So I'm really thankful to be here.
Right on. Thank you, Lorenzo. And I'm Mike Siegel, a civil rights lawyer, public school teacher, and like Julie, ran for Congress twice. Unfortunately, did not succeed here in the Texas 10th, which is held by Michael McCall. And, I just came off winning 187,000 votes, which was supposed to be enough to win. And it wasn't. It was more than most of the Democrats running for Congress in Texas, but my opponent got 30,000 more. And so, some of this is about gerrymandering, but that's not the entire explanation, we know. And, because we're not going to have a role in redrawing the map. I mean, a lot of you know this, we're having redistricting starting pretty shortly here. We're not going to be able to change that very much at all, except maybe in the courts. And so this conversation tonight is really important for me about strategy and tactics and what we can put our heart and soul into and feel like we're on the right path to victory. So thank you all for letting me facilitate here and for being with me. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So we're going to start off with messaging. So in about 2 minutes each, and as candidates, we are, relatively experienced in talking for a time limit. So I'm hopeful everyone can handle that. We're going to talk about what our campaign message is, why it was important to you, and any challenges you face in getting your message out. And so Clayton, if we can, I would love to start with you.
Sure thing. So my basic message was just all that we're really fighting for is human dignity for everyone. That means healthcare that we're not afraid to use, where we can see whatever doctors we want, we can see whatever clinics we want. And guess what? That we can reopen rural hospitals. 4 counties in my district had no hospitals whatsoever. And life in rural areas can be kind of dangerous. You can get kicked by a horse or a cow, and that ain't fun, or bit by a snake. And so we really need county hospitals for everywhere, but it also means good jobs, justice reform, where no one should be afraid of the police. No one should live in fear. Everyone should have a good paying job. Internet needs to be a public utility for folks because God forbid we need it for everything these days. So the overarching message, of course, was this human dignity for all. And at the end of the day, I believe that's all folks really want.
So what kind of challenges did you face? I mean, do you feel like voters heard that message?
They did until they realized I was a Democrat, and then walls came down. I mean, I've had gentlemen, I remember I was talking to this one gentleman, And he said, you know, if you were an independent or running as any other political party, I would vote for you, but I just can't vote for a Democrat. And this is that the brand is so toxic, unfortunately. And that's one of the major obstacles. And one of the things I think we'll be talking more about today is how do we fix that brand? How do we move beyond that and really convince folks that like our message is a winning message if we can just reach them and break down those barriers.
Right on. Thanks, Clayton. Cristina, you want to share your thoughts on messaging?
Sorry, you know, I had the task of traveling across the state and trying to reach a really broad audience. I've been doing progressive organizing in Texas since I was a baby, and so almost for the last 20 years. And one of the things I think we all experienced is we are all progressives through and through, right? That we have a real vision about what our state and country can be and should be. But also that what I love about being a progressive in Texas generally is that there isn't a lefty choir to preach to. There are only non-believers to convert. And so I went out with the intention of allowing Texans to understand that we can dream big in Texas because we are big, that there is a long tradition in Texas of economic populism, that if you have a candidate that can speak to the real economic needs of Texans and bring people together, but also represent the diversity of this state, that I tried to speak to building a multiracial coalition, that there was strength in a state as big and diverse and complicated as this one, and letting people see their common interests. At the end of the day, you know, I didn't ultimately become the candidate because I wasn't chosen by Washington, but I had a message that allowed people to, one, imagine their power and how big Texas could be in leading the rest of the country on the major issues, whether it was climate change, healthcare, the economy, because we are so huge, but also reminding people that whether you're Black, brown, or white, that we have tremendous power when we come together, and people have pitted us against one another. So the last thing I would say as a Democrat running statewide in Texas is that I went in with the real understanding that yes, I needed to build a multiracial coalition, but something I think folks in Washington don't understand about Texas is that Texas, the majority of the population is brown and Black, but we are the super majority of the Democratic Party. And no candidate can win in Texas unless they know how to speak to that diversity. It doesn't mean that you need to be brown or Black, but you need to have an appreciation of that diversity and how to bring people together. So that is something I tried to do. And again, just remind people how powerful Texans are, and that through the power of us coming together, we could transform Texas and the rest of the country. And I still believe that's a winning message when we speak to the real economic needs of people that are suffering, and a real deep economic pain for most Texans that they live every single day.
Right on. Thank you so much. Lorenzo, your thoughts on messaging?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Cristina was saying. I was one of the beneficiaries of being able to see her campaign throughout the North Texas area and seeing the crowds that she was pulling in based upon what people consider, you know, are topics of taboo that we're not supposed to be speaking about, but really we're speaking about issues that are affecting people. We're speaking to the issues that we're hearing on the ground. And that's how we ran our campaign as well here. We were really issues based. Healthcare was a big messaging point for us because of COVID. So we were talking about affordability, access, and what it means to say that healthcare is a human right. And actually, you know, making sure that our legislative body here in Texas is actually holding up to those ideals, but really public education focused. We know that, you know, North Texas is known for their great public schools, but we need to start matching, you know, the greatness of our teachers and the greatness of our students and our families with legislators that want to go and fight on behalf of everyone. And then we were talking about an economic you know, plan for our state, not just after COVID, but what really an economic plan that's going to continue to lift wages and provide future jobs, you know, that Texas is desperately going to need as we continue to grow our population here, but also an economic plan that is really focused on labor and our workers. I am a business person myself. I run my own small business, so I know what it is to do that, but I also know what it is to balance a checkbook and know where to, put our priorities to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind.
Thank you. Akilah, what are your thoughts on messaging?
I think that I have like a lot of huge thoughts on messaging. The first one is that we need to make sure that we are localizing our messages, and make sure that we're talking to the communities that we're running in, and that we're truly there to represent the communities that we're running in. And a lot of that means stop looking at what the polls say are winning messages, but what we know from where we are winning messages. And then also we need to make sure that we are talking in a language and that everyone can understand, right? Because one thing that I saw so much of, in my race included, is that we talk about percentages and we talk about data and we talk about the policy and what it looked like 3 and 4 years ago. And then we turn around and we see Republicans saying this very simple one-liner, and that's what sticks, right? And so I think that while it is so true that we need to have that same level of education that we're continuing to have, we need to make sure that we are campaigning and messaging in the most simplistic forms that actually stick, that catch. So when someone says, I'm going to go into the ballot box and I'm going to vote for candidate A or candidate B, that they're going to say, this is what this person believes, this is it. That's very simple, simplistic language that we have to make sure we get down to. And then also what I think that we have to do is we have to make sure that we are, especially in Texas, is creating a narrative that we're running on. One thing that we saw, and I'm sure you all saw in your race, is that the Republican Party, and they were great at this, is that they put messages on us that we did not even say, that we didn't agree with that, and then we turn around and we're left saying we didn't say this and trying to play defense at a time when we should be playing offense still. And so that is something that we have got to make sure that we are solidified in our messaging, we are strong and it's simple, and we are saying it and repeating it over and over and over again until it sticks. And another thing that I see with our messaging is that we have to make sure that we do is that we have to realize that we have to come to play to win, right? And even personally, is that we I think we're, as the party of high morality and things of that sort, is that I think that a lot of times we might want to lessen the blows in which we throw, right? Because we understand that there are people on the other side, and we understand what that feels like to have lies told about us. And we're not going to tell lies, but what those harsh messages, that language sounds like. But to some degree, again, it has to be simple, it has to be strong, it has to be effective, and it has to catch. And that is something that we're all going to have to just let that go and say, we're coming to win, and we're going to win with truth, and we're going to win with honesty, and we're going to win with dignity. But we're going to win, and we're going to tell you aggressively, straight up in your face, what it is we're trying to say, and we're going to define who you are, and hold no punches. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Julie, take it away.
Oh, so I'm gonna come at this from two perspectives. I feel like after the primary, there was this new world in which we were living. It was the coronavirus world, and we all started sheltering in place, doing Zoom calls. We as a campaign, our message pivoted completely away from campaigning. We pivoted to, helping our fellow communities and, providing resources for them where they could get help within their communities. And I will say that probably took 2 months out of our campaign. So we were not messaging the typical campaign things. It didn't seem appropriate. So I'd say that was one of the messages, but it was also a challenge as well. But when we did start messaging and hopping back, over into the more political campaign space, it was always healthcare for me. That's the reason why I got in this. But it was about high-paying jobs in a new energy, green energy sector. It was about political corruption. The guy I'm running against had at least two just recent scandals, a third not too long ago. But I will say that our paid messaging, what we put on TV and in digital ads, really, really focused on the political corruption. And I think, honestly, in retrospect, that may have been too narrow. And I think we probably should have focused a little more on rebuilding our economy, and what are the jobs we are going to bring, what are the stable jobs in stable industries that we're going to provide high paying jobs in Texas. And then I will say last, I think one of the biggest challenges is that we couldn't go door to door after the pandemic hit. We did everything virtually, and probably for the most part, we're singing to the choir on these Zoom calls. You have the problem with phone calls and phone banking is that people stop answering their phones when thousands of candidates are calling them, or organizations. They just stop answering their phones. And then we're still cycling through getting good data in Texas so that we can call voters that are tied to that phone number. So those are some of the challenges I think that we faced as candidates.
Right on. Thanks, Julie. Well, for me, I won my nomination, had people spend multiple millions against me in the primary, and I won running on a progressive platform, Medicare for all, ending the war on drugs, strong protections for voting rights, and especially a Green New Deal. I really leaned into it, this idea of a national jobs guarantee to confront climate change, to address environmental racism, and to turn our economy around. And so the progressive messaging helped me build a broad coalition, helped me win the support of the Sunrise Movement, all these volunteers who made hundreds of thousands of phone calls. And it got me some national attention, some small dollar donors. And of course, I did talk, like all of you, about these other more nuanced issues, or maybe some of them are not nuanced, they're critical issues, high-speed internet for everyone, progressive foreign policy, moving away from militarism, putting forward diplomacy, and on down the road. But I will admit that if you looked at my paid communications, my TV ads, my mail pieces, my digital ads, it was more narrow. And it's all these consultants at the table, the Democratic Party's at the table, they're putting in some money, they would have questions. And so it really came down to, healthcare and jobs, but more in a vague way. And that's where I do have some regrets. Like, I'm not sure that I got my message out in the way I wanted it to get out. And of course, it's hard because so much of it is national, focused on the presidential, that if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris aren't saying it, it almost doesn't matter what we say. And I will say that, I was branded the most radical liberal running for Congress in America. And put aside the idea that those words, radical and liberal, don't really go together. I was called a red diaper baby, a communist, a socialist, defund the police, abolish prisons. That's what my opponent was spending millions of dollars saying about me. And it didn't really matter in the scheme of things. And, there are other congressional campaigns that had 4 or 5 times the money as me, with moderates who said, I'm against defund the police. I don't support Medicare for all. They came out against progressive messaging with 5 times the money, and they didn't do better than me. Like, in terms of, district by district, dollar by dollar, they did not perform better. And so I definitely want everyone to know that progressive messaging didn't hurt us. But to me, the challenge is that if the higher ups on the ticket aren't saying those messages, how can we communicate them? If Joe Biden's not saying in a nationalized campaign, how can we communicate a progressive message in Texas? And so to me, that's one of the key questions we need to work on. Cristina, you were in a primary, and then you got to watch the general from kind of the seats, so to speak. So how do you analyze the Senate messaging, and then also, what we need moving forward?
Yes, I think obviously there's so much to learn for progressives. And I think what we need to be in is a state of not looking at 2020 as a failure, but looking at it as an opportunity to learn and build and grow our movement. Because the fact that you had someone like Lorenzo running in Collin County, the fact that you had Aklah Bacy running in Houston, that you had Clayton Tucker running in rural Lampasas on these issues, and Julie and Mike and all of us running, I think it speaks to the momentum that we're building in the state. So that being said, the Senate race, I was in a 12-way dogfight. It was a really hard race to try and get oxygen in a 22 media market state of 29 million. And we started to build momentum at the end. I think that some of the things that we need to reflect on the Senate race is that no progressive that was contending to run statewide in 2020 won their Senate race. So that includes Charles Booker, that includes Andrew Romanoff. We actually brought those Senate races together to analyze what we needed to do as progressives, because we are very close for progressives winning statewide to become the statewide nominees for the Democratic Party. And we just need a little more infrastructure to get over the finish line. So one, I think we need to actually congratulate that we've gotten this far with as little infrastructure federally to run statewide as we have as progressives. Now, I think the other message and learning point for us as progressives, especially here in Texas, is that I really hope that the idea that in Texas you run a moderate Republican-like candidate that doesn't know how to speak to the diversity of the state or build a multiracial coalition is dead. And I endorsed MJ because of course I wanted MJ to win over John Cornyn, but we had a real problem, and that hurt all of these great candidates down ballot because they didn't have a candidate at the top of the ticket statewide that was investing deeply here in the Valley where I am. You know, I was just speaking with Tejano leaders that have been doing Democratic politics here in the Valley since La Raza Unida party, and how troubled and hard it was for them to get the resources they needed and support to do the work here on the ground. So we know that we lost big swaths of the Latino vote, especially here in more rural areas. And they all see that here as lack of investment. I do want to really push back on the idea that we lost the Latino vote overall. That is false. Please don't believe the reporting. 67% of Latinos in Texas voted for Biden. Harris ticket, 75% of Latino women. And in my race, I came in third in the primary. I took about 250,000 votes. I was outspent tremendously. I was not the choice of Chuck Schumer, but I know that we've built tons of infrastructure that we can continue to build off of statewide, and we are very, very, very close. You know, I missed making into the runoff by 20,000 votes, and I think Royce did a tremendous job in the runoff. I first endorsed him in the runoff, and I know that had a candidate that, like myself, also could really differentiate from the more moderate candidate, that we can win statewide office. But it requires also organizing and infrastructure building in between years. And that's why I'm in the Valley right now, to figure out how we continue to do that and support people here on the ground that are doing that work. And that's what you all are part of this conversation as well. Organize, not just in election years, organize every year.
Fantastic. And that's a great segue, Cristina, to the next, section of our discussion here, which is, what were the results? And so how did each of you do? How do you analyze your results? And then, to the extent we have in your 2 minutes, what strategy or tactics might have made a difference? And for this section, we're going to start off with Julie.
So, one of the challenging parts of analyzing this, that we still don't have voter level information yet in our database. So it's hard to analyze who actually turned out to vote. So we'll have probably more thoughts on this once that information gets uploaded to the Texas Democratic Party's database that we all as candidates use. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I will say that in analyzing results and what happened in Texas, clearly polling did not catch the folks, the wave of the non-college educated white voters who showed up in numbers for Trump, and that helped definitely lift down ballot races for sure. I think what's really interesting, and Mike, you each spoke to this, that all politics really is national. So if we don't have national leaders talking about issues that are pertinent to what voters want to hear in our states, we can try to yell as loudly as we can, but it's not going to be amplified if you're not getting it at the national level too. And it was really, really challenging to get media to focus on some of these races, including my race. It was very, very challenging. Although the media will regurgitate anything Trump says or tweets, it's impossible to get them to, interview one of us for comments on anything. I think it was really interesting in analyzing the results of Texas, not necessarily mine. By the way, we got nearly 50,000 more votes than the last presidential year, 2016. So again, we are growing our numbers. We are shrinking the margins between the Republican and Democratic side. So this is progress. It didn't result in electoral victories, but this is definitely progress. But when you look at, in Texas specifically, we have 11 safe Democratic congressional seats. 11 of them. They were the worst performing in terms of turnout in the state. Mike, you had the third highest Democratic turnout in the state. It was phenomenal. But it shows that when you actually are campaigning, you boost turnout. And for some of the safe Democrats who don't actually campaign, of which there are a number, the turnout numbers were abysmal. There were average turnout for a congressional district in Texas, 308,000. That's the average. We had 2 safe Democratic seats that didn't even break 160,000 votes in total for their districts. We're not talking about that's because they have smaller population. We're talking about they did not campaign. They didn't campaign for top of ticket. They didn't campaign for bottom of the ticket. And that is a problem. Folks, if you are elected, you need to be campaigning like you are going to lose your seat every November election, that you are up for re-election. And we don't have that here in Texas. So that was one of the really interesting things I saw. And I can tell you that, some of these safe Dem seats are moderate at best Democrats. Some might even say Republican light or Republican leaning. So it just shows you that when you're wishy-washy and somebody doesn't really know what you stand for, you're not going to inspire people to turn out. When you run on Green New Deal, Medicare for all, you get the third highest turnout in the state. Well done, Mike.
Thanks, Phil. Right on. Akilah, so what were your results? How do you analyze them? What could have been different?
Well, I agree with Julie in that, it's hard to analyze without looking at the data. I think it's extremely important that the messaging that we're pushing forth is a message of truth, a message that's centered in data, that's centered in what we need to do to go forward and not just speculation. But with that being said, we did, our margin was about 3 points. Unfortunately, that is an increase in the margin for 138, which is at about like 0.01 at first, less than a half a point, certainly. In 2018. But what we also saw, again, like across this, is that I was also the Democrat who received most votes in this district ever, right? So we have to look at that too, is that our numbers are increasing, our numbers are growing, but so are theirs. And so that is the issue that we cannot lose sight of. We have to see what is it, right? And I think that what happened, and we're looking at that, one thing is that, everyone was on this rampage to register so many new voters, and we had very little data on who these voters were. I think now we're going into this era where we have an idea of who a lot of these voters were, and not only that, there was something very I hate the word special because I think that has a positive connotation to it, but very something different about what Trump did. And that I think that he brought out an electorate, he brought out a base that we hopefully will not see again. People who are just Trumpers, like we're just going to come, we're going to vote for Trump. And they did, we saw them, there were agitators at polls that were very much like this, like a race we've never seen before. And so I think we're looking at what he did, and seeing what that effect was, right? And seeing, are they going to go back into the shadows, or is this a voting bloc that's here to stay that we need to strategize around, and figure out how do we come back from that? I think we have to be very realistic about what it is that we could have done better, but also there are things that were out of our control. And looking at those things too, to see where do we go from here to make sure that we are becoming the most effective leaders that we can for our state.
Right on. Thank you. Clayton, what are your thoughts on the results?
Well, for my race, I think we did pretty good, particularly being a progressive out here in rural Texas. Beto, with all the money in the world in 2018, got around between 80 to 90,000, and we got just shy of 120. So we had a pretty good boost. And I'm feeling pretty proud of my team and all of our volunteers and everyone who's phone banked and everyone who really helped us. So major kudos to all the helpers and supporters and staff for my campaign. What I would like to have done differently, honestly, what I would really like to do is to go much more on basically a policy offensive, particularly in rural areas where, like, go to near Abilene where they have wind farms. Abilene's going to benefit tremendously from a Green New Deal. tremendously. I mean, that is such a massive jobs program. When we have wind farms just being able to go up, and even I think we need to really pull in farmers and ranchers. They already harvest our food. Let's create programs where they can start harvesting our electricity. Let's install wind turbines and solar panels on the farmers, and then we can start taking them back. We can really, I think that's going to be key for us taking back rural areas and really advertising that through radio, through digital, through billboards even, and is really normalizing and popularizing our ideas and taking these national ideas and making them local. How would a Green New Deal affect Taylor County where Abilene is? How will Medicare for All affect San Saba, which does not have its own hospital? You know, is really take these national ideas and localize them. That's something I would have done differently, but that's also something I'm working on now with my day job, so.
Right on. And you can feel free to give a plug, Clayton.
To Our Revolution Texas, you can learn more at ourrevolutiontx.com.
Thank you, Ed. Well, so I'll share a little bit on my thoughts, and definitely, ping me if I go over my 2 minutes here. So for me, the final result was a big shock. When I started this work in 2017, the Republican McCall, he was winning by 20 and 30%. But in 2018, when I ran the first time, with a hustle grassroots campaign, we got that down to a 4% margin in 2018. And so when I decided to run again in 2020, when I convinced my wife to come along for the ride one more time and to support me quitting my job and doing all this work, it was because we thought we could win. And we did so much of what when I started out in this next race, I was like, okay, more money. Okay, we raised over $3 million this time. It was like 8 times what we raised last time. We had a bigger team, better consultants. We were on TV. We had good mail. We made millions of voter contacts. I mean, we blew up everything as we hoped to do. We hit our win number, but I lost by 7% after losing by 4%. Lost by 30,000 votes after losing by about 14,000 and change. And over 210,000 people in this district thought McCall, or at least the Republican, was their guy. I mean, and that to me was shocking. Even though it's a gerrymandered district, of course, it was supposed to be 60% Republican. But the big surprise for me was the maximum Republican turnout. And I just want to come back to something that Clayton said, that the Democratic brand in Texas is not nearly strong enough. It wasn't enough to be on Biden and Harris's ticket. I mean, there was a huge drop off after them. So not only did the national ticket dominate the airwaves, dominate the messaging, dominate the conversation, dominate the opportunities to talk to the media, but then there was a huge drop off. It's like they didn't carry us with them. And so it was like we got the worst of both worlds, unfortunately, that we didn't get a voice in sharing our message, but then we also didn't get carried along with the wave. And so I do think, just to wrap up, that progressives are saying the things that we need. We need healthcare. We need economic aid during a pandemic. We're speaking to the needs of the people, but they're not hearing us. And to me, that's the big question. Cristina, we haven't gone to you on this one, have we?
Sorry, you have to remind me of which question we're on.
Okay, this is the results question.
I think that there's some things. One, I feel like I want to give props again to the down ballot races, especially Mike and Julie in this moment, in that there was a conversation that happened nationally that federal races, congressional races were lost because progressives were too progressive, right? But if you look at Julie and Mike's races compared to some of the other great but more moderate candidates that ran as Democrats, they didn't do better than Mike or Julie. What you did have happen in Texas is, yes, we increased voter turnout. We decreased the share, our percentage, closed the gap from 2016. But we also saw some real challenges. The fact is that we knew Republicans, when you get within striking distance with 2.6 percentage points, they're gonna come out and fight. They're going to start investing. Republicans held power in Texas, not with a mandate. They have held power in Texas for the last several decades by a minority of voter participation. And now they realize that they had to actually do work. And guess what? They did work to hold on to the largest battleground state. But we still are very close. So we need to not get downtrodden about the fact that we didn't win. We need to realize that we got them shaking in their boots still. And that in places where I am in the Valley, where people are hyper focused on the Latino vote overall went for Biden, and I'm in the Valley where Bernie Sanders won in the Democratic primary. So when you speak to the economic pain of people, you move them. What they want to know is that you're not there for your party, that you're there for them as people. And I think that that's where we win as progressives, when we talk about issues that matter, when we speak to people's economic pain. So I think we have a lot to build off of. What we've got to remember is that our movement as progressives is still very young, okay? I was the first person that was asked by the labor movement and progressive groups to run in statewide since Jim Hightower, okay? So what we did to come in third when I was taking on the national Democratic establishment and the Texas Democratic establishment, however small it is still, I took on both of those as someone that wasn't independently wealthy, someone that had never held political office before, and as an organizer, and proved that we are able to make traction. And I want to say the thing that I am most proud of in my race was that I got so many people that would say, I see myself as much more moderate than you, Cristina, but you've convinced me that the way we win is actually running on big, bold policy ideas, and that's also how we negotiate to win on the issues that matter to people. That when we start at a negotiating place where we're only willing to fight for what we believe Republicans will concede to us, that people don't believe in us. And so I think that there's a lot to build off of. And I just want to say the other thing is, even though I didn't get to be in the runoff or the Democratic candidate, that I was so inspired by you all making it. And that if anything I did to help make it easier for people like down ballot anywhere during the primary, I am grateful that I got to help and that you guys got to keep pushing the message. It's not about one candidate, it's about how we all build together. And we're still just learning how to do this, right? So thank you for building together and knowing that this is just part of the first wave of what we do.
Hey, Mike, can I mention one thing off of what Christina's saying? You know, when you offer people a message, a real message that speaks to where they are in this moment right now in their lives, and you're not talking Democrats speak, you're not talking party speak. You actually can do amazing things in very conservative districts. And I had probably one of the most conservative that was considered competitive, although I don't think it ever came out of safe R territory, according to Cook. But we outperformed, we being the Texas 25 congressional race, outperformed MJ in our district. When you add up MJ's votes that are solely within the confines of District 25 and mine, we actually outperformed her with a very, very unabashedly progressive message. And I don't know if you've done that same analysis in your race, but you know, for a very conservative district, they went more for me than they did for her. And I was one down from that. So I appreciate what Cristina brought to Texas politics in a very unabashed way at a statewide level that we hadn't seen in years. So I sure hope you're going to do something again.
Likewise, on my phones.
Lorenzo, how'd it go for you, and how do you sum up the results?
Yeah, I want to use my results as a celebration for everyone who volunteered and helped get us over the edge. People like Cristina, who I was so thankful to be able to cast my ballot for during the primary. I wanted that kind of energy and enthusiasm. When I cast my ballot for people, I want to know that they're going to go fight on behalf of me and my family and my community and my neighbors. And I think that's really what we saw in our race. Even though we did get pushed back a little bit from our 2018 numbers that we had. I was a first-time candidate. I did better in these competitive races than most of these first-time candidates ever did. We had more volunteers. We made more calls. We were the #1 in individual small dollar donations out of any House race, which is incredible. These are the kind of energy that we need to continue to have if we want to be successful. I got painted as, you know, a progressive because I was listening to people and then going and talking on behalf of the problems that they see are happening in their households and their communities. That is what we need to continue to do. People get behind this messaging when they know that they can trust us behind closed doors to be the fighters that we're promising to be. There's a big focus here, especially in Collin County. People always want to talk about how we win these swing voters, but we were able to see, even in a district like mine, I was outperforming MJ in a lot of these precincts. If you are outperforming at a House race, your senatorial candidate, it's really, really hard to believe, these people are actually going and flipping and choosing me over, some of these Democrats, and splitting these tickets. And that's what we need. We need people to energize. I don't really speak on behalf of my party. I speak on behalf, and more than anything than speaking, I'm listening to the voters and to the people in my community, and then, framing my messaging around what they're telling me that they need. And if we continue to do that, I think we're really setting ourselves up for success here. And I want to put a renewed focus on these local races. For city council, the GOP has been so successful at filling their base from the bottom up, and then allowing these people to continually get promoted. Well, once we get our people in there, we're going to be able to show that, these progressive policies are not radical, that these people are just looking for a promotion to make sure that they can continue to fight at a higher level for the people that they're intended to serve.
Right on. Well, thank you, Lorenzo. And that's a perfect segue. I mean, our last topic, we got about 12 minutes or so here, about 2 minutes each. And so what's next? What do we need to do to build a progressive movement in Texas? So Akilah, would you keynote this portion of the
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think what we need to do is, I think we need to be unapologetic about our message, and like kind of what we said earlier, but also make it simple, bring it home. And I appreciate what Clayton was saying, in that how he was bringing it, he was localizing a very national message that we're all talking about. We're all talking about broadband. We're all talking about expanding, new jobs, what that looks like. What does that look like for your community? And so I think it's still that same simple message, and then saying, but this is what it looks like for this race where I'm running. This is what it looks like here, and for me it'd be 138. Things like that. And so I think that that's extremely important going forward. And also what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're relying on accurate data, that we are talking to the right people, and that we're not putting people who, getting people out to vote who we need to honestly let the Republicans get out to vote or allow them to stay home, but making sure that our data is precise, and that's where we start. And it also starts right here with conversations like this, where we're not going to say, we're not stopping, we're not going silently into that good night. We're not, you know what I mean? I'm sure we all licked our wounds after our results, but we're saying we're licking our wounds and we're healing and we're coming back out fighting, because I'll tell you this, it's hard to beat somebody who never gives up. So that's how we have to keep going.
Beautiful. Well, Lorenzo, can we go back to you? Anything you want to add in terms of the path forward?
Yeah, they're never going to outwork us, right? We're always just going to keep working at it, because we really believe in what we're, talking to people about. This isn't about me or any of us individually. It's about what we can do to move our communities and our great state forward. Moving forward, it's just continuing to find people. Right now, I'm really focused on making sure that we are putting really progressive Democrats in some of these city council races and school board races, so that we can continue to promote them throughout the state. And really, I just want to tell our volunteers that, even though we got pushed back, things could have been so much worse. It was because of their hard work that we were able to hold that line. It was because of all those hours and that passion that's behind some of the issues that I was speaking about. And don't allow people within our party or the Republican Party to gaslight huge swaths of our Democratic base, but by saying these are things you can't talk about. And these are definitely things we need to continue to speak about. If it's something going on in our communities, then we need to be fighters for them and continue to let people know what we stand for. And hopefully we're going to see continued success in the future.
Right on. Thank you. Clayton, your closing thoughts on the path ahead.
So what we fundamentally need to do is create local progressive powerhouses. And we need to do this all across the state. We can't just rely on the Texas Triangle or the cities. We need to do this East Texas, West Texas, South Texas, you name it. And the way we do that is through three fundamental things. First, we need to get progressive champions and elected. And I'm talking about local folks. I'm talking city council and school boards, because let us not forget, Trump and his movement didn't come out of nowhere. They started off being those far right radicals in the school board and city councils, and then they worked their way up. We're going to have to start taking over city councils, and we're going to have to start taking over school boards, because again, DC is not going to fix us. Only Texans can fix us. So if you are in the Austin area, I need you to support Jimmy Flanagan and Allison Alter for Austin City Council. And if you're in Houston, Tarsa Jackson, support her too. We have to make sure these progressives win. And then in 2021, we have to make sure we get more progressives in city councils and in school boards. Next, we need to really win on progressive policies. There are a lot of really good bills in the state ledge that we have to push. There's the Healthy Texas Act, which is essentially Medicare for all Texans. Or we Texans might as well call it Medicare for y'all. And y'all means all in this case. And that's being sponsored by Representative Gina Hinojosa. So you can go to healthytexasact.org to learn more about that act. We're also trying to get a Green New Deal Act, a Green Texas Act in there. And of course, the George Floyd Act. We really got to get these pushing. We got to really normalize these. And we do need to go on a media campaign all over Texas, in rural Texas and South Texas, explaining these ideas, normalizing and popularizing the ideas, and getting Republicans to agree with us too. And the final bit, we have to really build up and transform the Texas Democratic Party to become a true party of the people, a true progressive party that is held accountable and that sticks to bold and aggressive messaging. Because in a pandemic, we need a party that demands healthcare as a human right and nothing else. It is a human right. It was a human right before the pandemic, and it needs to be one now more than ever. With all the uninsured children and everyone else who is dying because they don't have health insurance. So that is what we're going to be working. And so if you want to do that, we need you to run for county chair. We need you to run for SDEC. We need you to run for precinct chair. We need you fundamentally to get involved so that we can build a progressive party, so that we can, by turning the Democratic Party into a progressive party, returning it to its roots, to really start winning on progressive issues and getting local progressive champions elected. Because as Cristina mentioned in the beginning of the show, Texas started off as a progressive populist state. Together, we will reclaim that. That is what we're fighting for. We're fighting to reclaim Texas.
Right on. Good stuff, Clayton. Well, for my 2 cents, I'm just gonna, I guess, identify 2 tactical things that I think are really important. I mean, one, and I've seen some comments in the feed about year-round deep canvassing and organizing. And big picture, what this means is that an electoral campaign, and for me, I won the nomination July 14th. I had until November 3rd to run 9-county campaign. It's like, it's not enough. It's not the appropriate vehicle to do the kind of organizing that we have to do to activate the people, to speak to the people who we need to speak to really take Texas, you know? And so that means investing. All these people, you know, some people sent me $2,100 checks. Can they write a $1,000 check to pay for the canvassing, not for the candidate, just to build the base? And it's going to fold in the messaging stuff. But to me, we need to be working year round in the same way that the Republicans are working year round. The other piece for me is about organization. And I like Clayton's note of optimism that progressives can inject themselves into the state party. Until that happens, I mean, we need to have all these other organizations that keep us together, that help us develop unified messaging, that bring in investment, that help us wage primaries against candidates who might say that they're going to meet the Republican in the middle, but they can't motivate anybody. I mean, what does Jim Hightower say? What's in the middle of the road? You know, yellow lines and dead armadillos, right? I mean, middle of the road candidates are not going to motivate people. I mean, just look what Trump does. Look how far right. I mean, the dude's a fascist and he motivates people. And so, not to say we need to go all the way the other direction, you know, full communism now, but I think we need a real progressive message that gets people excited, that says we're fighting for change. All right. With that, Cristina, the path forward.
Yeah, so, you know, I've seen the messages, and there was 2 key things that keep coming up, right? Is that one, national Democrats have told us that Texas isn't winnable for years. But they also told us that Arizona and Georgia was not winnable for years. But what happened in Arizona and Georgia was that communities, particularly communities of color, the Latino community mostly, and indigenous community in Arizona, and the Black community led by Stacey Abrams and Nse Ufet of the New Georgia Project, came together and said, we're not going to wait for the party to organize. We're going to start organizing. So it took a decade for them to flip. It did not happen overnight. It was hard organizing of registering and mobilizing voters that were often forgotten by both political parties. So we need to do that in Texas. I think that there are two powers and ways we make electoral change. I think there's the power of institution and the power of inspiration. And I think you need both. The power of institution is organizing year round. It is how many doors we knock on, it's how many voters we talk to, how many people we register, and strong organizations and volunteers like you all that help make that possible. The other thing you need to move people, which is not quantifiable, it's when you reach inside of someone and you make them see their own power. So when I was at Jolt and we started Jolt and we were mobilizing young Latinos, I recognized that we couldn't just have power of institution, that even though we make up 40% of the state's population, I would meet so many young Latinos that believe we made up 10 or 15% of the state's population because they could not see themselves in power. And so we had to have a message that did three things: that honored our pain, that took us to a vision, a progressive vision of how things could change, and our power to make it happen. And we have to do that with all voters across Texas. We need to exercise the power of institution and the power of inspiration. And to me, no message works better than in Texas, that we can dream big because we are big, and that if you change Texas, you change everything. But none of us here are just here to change it from blue to red. We want to transform fundamentally the lives of Texans to be powerful, for our kids to go to great schools, nothing greedy, just what's fair and right for every single person.
Thank you, Cristina. Julie Oliver.
So I don't know how much I can add that hasn't already been shared, because wow, the comments from everybody have been on point, spot on. You know, messaging is a big part of this, I think, for progressive candidates. And it's funny, in 2018 when I lost, and again after 2020, I was like, what am I going to do? It's like, we have got to share. You know, sometimes because we're in this, you know, 24/7 for 2 years at a time, we understand what our message is, but we need to share that, what's up here, with others. So sharing how do you frame Medicare for all? And if that is, for some people, just they don't even want to hear the words of Medicare for all coming out of the mouth, then let's talk about how we already pay for universal healthcare in Texas, and it's called the emergency room, and you're paying for it in your property taxes. Your income taxes are going to other states, and if you're lucky enough to have insurance, guess what? You're paying for it again in your insurance premiums. So we need to have some messaging. We need to have messaging discipline. That is one thing. If we take a page from the Republicans' books, messaging discipline, they hit the same points over and over again. And they distill it into something that is digestible. And I think that we have that ability to do that. We don't have to get heady. We don't have to have, you know, these debates, Socratic debates about things. We could just make things digestible to people, but also let them know why progressive values are the economic values. They're not mutually exclusive. Doing the right thing is not mutually exclusive of saving money or being the most cost effective. And I think we need to be able to marry those two. And then taking another page, I hate to say this from Republicans, but they've been doing this again for nearly 40 years. They don't wait until a few months before an election to get organized. They don't have off years. And they're doing something year round, every year, all the time, whether that's, you know, registering voters, recruiting volunteers, having meetings, doing the things that keep people engaged year round. We need to be able to do that. And to Lorenzo and Clayton's point, start local, build the bench locally, and from there up. I know we all want to go after shiny, bright objects. I mean, I never went for a local. I went to a congressional race because I thought I could help on the healthcare scene. But the reality is we need to build that bench, and we need to do it locally because we know the names then. And to Lorenzo's point, we can grow them up to the next level. And I think that's how we do this. And it is a long game, y'all. It is a long game. So be prepared to be in this for the long haul. Are we going to have gains in 2022? I don't know. I hope so. I do think we'll have gains. I mean, will we have wins? I don't know. Will we have gains? Absolutely, we will. We will have gains. It's incremental approach, but we keep at it again and again and again.
Awesome. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Like a lot of you, I've been, peeling myself off the pavement and really just inspired to listen to each one of you. Of course, we haven't answered 1/10 of the questions that need to be answered. So hopefully everyone who's watching this, whether it's live or later, you'll follow each one of the people on here. Aklah Bacy, Lorenzo Sanchez, Clayton Tucker, Julie Oliver, Cristina Tzuntzun Ramirez. I'm Mike Siegel. Thank you all for joining us. The struggle continues. Talk to you soon.